Welcome to the Lit Media Workshop. This is Internet 1. We're going to learn a little bit about the history of the Internet today. I hope you enjoyed that intro. So we're going to talk about networks. What are networks? What are they made of? We're going to talk about communication before the Internet. Basically just some context and stuff around the history of the Internet. We're not going to go super deep, but it will be probably some things that you may not have heard before. We're going to talk about what the internet actually is, things that happened a little bit before the internet, probably before your time, even some of the things before my time. We are actually going to talk about things like the telegraph and Morse code, and isn't that exciting? We'll also talk about surfing the web, which will be one of your homework assignments to come back with next time. Okay. So let's remember here about digital media literacy. Part of the point of this class is, again, an appreciation for the kinds of different media that we have. This includes some pretty old kinds of techniques for communication, like the telephone. We don't really even have landlines these days, the radio, but all of these different media have their own special ways that you should be communicating with them. So that's why we're here. We're learning to appreciate these things and to use them. What is a network? Well, you've probably heard of networks before. Network cords, something called Ethernet. This is the wired part that might go into your wireless router at home. You've also heard of the internet. The internet is this the internet, right? This is what we're talking about today. This is this big, globally connected, giant web of information. There's also intranets. I mentioned this, I think, during the discussion in class last time. An intranet includes something that's local. So you can have your own LAN party if you have an intranet and you don't even actually need the real internet. That is, I think it's pretty much true. Okay, so there's lots of other kinds of networks as well, though. We have regular social networks, we have trains, we have telegrams, we have phones, we have the Pony Express. A network is just something that connects a bunch of different, otherwise individual items into a web, into a connection where you might not be able to talk to a particular thing directly, but you might be connected to, say, a friend of a friend. That's a kind of a network. So all of these things that I mentioned there, they have something called nodes. And nodes in this case, a lot of times they're represented as something like a dot. So this can be something like a page. And then these nodes are also connected like this. They have connections between them. But let's say that you have a network which is actually just a family tree. Maybe you have like a mom and a dad. And then your mom and dad have you. But then their mom and dad also have a mom and dad. That would be your grandparents. And then on your dad's side, maybe they also have a mom and a dad. Right? So you can think of all of these different kinds of situations where having this kind of thing, which is nodes and graphs, is extremely useful. This is extremely useful, especially in computer science, right? And in computer science, these are actually operationalized. For a web page, you might have an article on, say, Wikipedia, and you are reading about the internet. And on the internet page, there might be a link. And this link goes all the way to a different page to, let's say, a news article. So maybe this is CNN's website, and this is Wikipedia's website. But one thing that you should note here is that on the internet, the links are they're directional. So there's basically two types of links. Links that are directional. This is the like Instagram model where you can have a follower. And then there's also bidirectional links. This is what you might see on something like Facebook, where you might have a friend. We'll talk about some of these implications at a different time here. For now, let's just move on. So let's talk about communication before the internet. Before the internet, there were a bunch of different ways that people wanted to communicate. People have always wanted to have information very quickly, especially when you're in charge of a lot of people. So someone had to invent telegrams and Morse code. Morse invented Morse code and telegrams just about the same time the trains were becoming more popular, and they were just around when they were being built. So at the same time in the United States, when you were building the train, you also had telegram lines being put in. This was great because it meant you could get word from one side of the country to the other side of the country pretty quickly, in minutes instead of in days, which is extremely different than something like the Pony Express, where you would have to actually give someone a letter, they'd have to ride a horse, and they'd have to get someplace. Now, eventually, this whole concept of having these telegrams and having this fast information and this thing called Morse code, which I'll definitely be playing a clip of that, right? Morse code is like bip, 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 and this is where you can encode different kinds of letters. So it's really one of the first times that we're using an analog signal and human interpretation to digitize something that used to be just some blips into letters and words. So we'll spend a little time in class.
Elements again. Same number of dits, same number of das in exactly the same order. But this time he will change the spacing a little. Dit for dit and da for da, they match. Only the spacing makes the difference between one word and the other.
Talking about that. Before you had the internet, you also had phones, you had switches, and you had operators. Now, these switches were actual physical cords where you had a big bunch of these kind of like headphone jack things. And you'd have a person who had to actually listen on a phone and to take the information down and say, okay, well, where do you want to go? They'd take one of these plugs and they'd move it from wherever it was, and they would connect from one place to another place. So if your particular phone was being used and it got to that particular operator, you might be forwarded to a place that you wanted to go. And doing this allowed you to go from talking from one person in your own city to somebody way across on the other side of the world.
Like the operators who handle telephone calls in my town. Here in the central office, you can feel the pulse of the community. The flashing lights on the switchboard reflect the activity of the town.
Thank you.
It begins to stir in the early hours of the morning.
Very, very useful. Trains are a kind of a network, and Western Union was developing these things at the same time. Eventually, the operators had different kinds of jobs. Maybe they got a little bit sad because these were replaced with machines that could do the automatic switching based on telephone numbers. But along with all of these different changes, they still had other kinds of jobs to do. People had other jobs. They could use fax machines to actually send documents. Maybe I can find a clip of that. But basically, this is like a very just before the internet. I would even call it an internet. And something that isn't appreciated nowadays is Xerox machines. Xerox machines took over something like carbon copying, where you could only make so many copies of a kind of document. So if you wanted to be a publisher, if you wanted to get the memo out to all of your employees, it was extremely time consuming, and you basically had to have your own printing shop.
No master to type. Just take your original, lay it here, set the dial for the copies, push start, and you can do it yourself.
Xerox made so much money doing this in the 60s and in the 70s, and they were like the biggest tech company. They were like IBM and Apple and Microsoft all combined into one in their heyday. So after that, and I hope you enjoyed the clips I hope I played, we had what I call the primordial internet. This is the internet before it was really the internet. You still had networking, right? You still had nodes, and you had something called ARPANET. ARPANET was this huge network that went all the way across the country, but it was at a very limited amount of different kinds of universities. I don't remember exactly how many nodes there were at the maximum, but it was much less than the actual internet that we have. But for like the 70s and the 80s, this was the biggest networked computer system that existed.
The computer technology has been moving in a way that nothing else people have ever known has moved. Here's a field that gets 1,000 times as good in 20 years.
This means that users sitting at a terminal would be able to hit a key and see a response virtually instantly, almost as if that computer, wherever it were, looked like it was in the same room. A simple way to interconnect computers and to form such a network is to place wideband leased circuits, in the case of the ARPANET 50 kilobit per second circuits, between each of the computers, and then to interconnect each of the computers to each other to form a fully connected network. Now, such a network would then operate essentially in the same fashion as the previous one, with this computer talking to this computer by first sending a message to its imp, having this imp relay it to this imp, and this imp relay it to this imp, and then this imp deliver it to the final destination.
And people were very proud of it. It was really fantastic for things like scientific collaboration, where you want to do something like share a file or say, hey, how did your experimental results go? Or say, hey, I forgot to tell you something about your experimental results, and I have to tell you today. I can't tell you tomorrow, or else my experiment is ruined. But this enabled some really early cool technologies, like early synchronous chatting, like chat rooms or messaging applications. It enabled things like system administration and network monitoring. And just at the cusp of this happening in 75, in maybe 1980, and at this time, personal computing finally was good enough to actually use for very dedicated people. And with these home computers came this bulletin board system. Now, these bulletin board systems were not as good as the internet, but they did enable some of the same kind of community building. And the way that it worked in a bulletin board system was that basically it was like you had a giant whiteboard. And on this giant whiteboard, you could log in and you could just write something on that whiteboard. But to physically do that, you had to use a telephone and call somebody's phone that they had hooked up to a computer. And some of the people in the videos I found, they refer to this as kind of a well. So it's not all of the information, it's just some of the information. You couldn't get it immediately, you wouldn't get any notifications, but some people frequented these places, and it made a community popular. So you'd publish these numbers and you just hope that people showed up, but there wasn't the network in the same way. You couldn't hop from one bulletin board system to another bulletin board system through a hyperlink.
Available to anyone with a personal computer, the Parents' Place Bulletin Board is online every evening from 5 p.m. to 9 a.m. It offers up-to-date articles on child rearing and answers questions about typical childhood events, from temper tantrums to toilet training.
Ezra, now you run your own bulletin board. Tell me what that is. I've been sort of a nut about these things for about 3 years, and I have finally set up a bulletin board system in my basement that runs on my computer when I'm not using the machine. And it's there as a sort of community chat center and a source of public domain software programs for people who want to download or upload them.
Is there any particular type of programs that you offer on your network, on your bulletin board?
Stuff basically that I'm interested in.
Such as?
There's an area for Radio Shack Model 100 computers. There's another area for fairly technical programs for the IBM PC. And there is another area for the software for the bulletin board itself. So that if somebody wants to set up a bulletin board, he can call my system and get the software so that he can do it in his own.
Not before the internet. And that brings us to, what is the internet? We talked a little bit about this in class, and I really enjoyed all of your responses to this. And I mean, I had a definition of the internet before. It's just a infrastructure for communication that happens in a distributed way. But it was very difficult for people at the time to conceptualize what was happening. It reminds me a lot of the large language models discussions that I've been hearing from my university students, where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's legal. I don't know what's cheating and not cheating. And it's changed our relationship with how we interact with information. And I would just want to highlight a couple of things here, right? It really changed publications. If you wanted to publish something, it was really easy to publish on the internet. If you wanted to consume something, if you just wanted to look up some sports statistics or something that otherwise would have only been only for the very, very richest people who might get something like stock tips by wire, this was finally a way that you could do that. And really what it offered a lot of is freedom of information, freedom of software, and this is something that continues today, and in some ways has accelerated. We also talked about a few different ways to look at the internet. There's the phenomenological view of that, right? Where you're actually looking at just how it feels as an experience. You type a question into a search engine and it gives you an answer. Or you have your particular forum for vinyl records and you hang out with people who are there, you communicate things in your subreddit on Reddit, and that's your experience. It just gives you access to all kinds of different things without having to dial into different servers, without having to do a lot of the technical things that used to be a kind of speed bump on the way there. The other thing we talked about was kind of the literal internet, the technical internet here. So in this version, this is a very common graph you find. This was from Wikipedia, the OSI 7-layer model of networking. And in a physical, technical sense, what this means is that you can start with something physical, an actual network cord. And that actual network cord, it provides the physical electrons that actually go through wires to eventually end up serving an application. And I'm not going to go over these in detail this time. I might go over them in more detail next time. But basically, what the internet provided was a standard. Not everyone had the same kind of bulletin board system software, but this internet created a standard both for physical hardware and equipment.
Hi.
Hi. This your house?
Yep. Could you tell me something?
Sure, if I can.
Where does this wire go?
Well, you see, this is telephone wire. And it's going to run from your house to the big cable on top of that pole.
How come it's so big on the pole and so little down here?
That cable's got about 100 wires inside of it, and each one of them connects to a phone in somebody's home or office.
The cable then travels from pole to pole until it reaches our central office, where all the little wires are connected to switching equipment.
And the we haven't talked a lot about this, but basically the brains of some of the computers, the software of some of the computer systems that could take something from one node to another node to another node to another node to another node, and finally go from its source to its final destination without really having to think about it that hard, with the ability to backtrack if something else failed. So, but I do want us to appreciate the path to getting here, which included the telegram and the physical human operators to plug you in from one place to another place. This is that, just at a crazy different kind of scale. And scale is basically how big or how complex something is. Now, we won't talk about this until a couple more weeks from now, but there's also the social aspect of the internet. Because the publication is different, because the relationship with the publisher and the consumer is really different, it just makes certain things tend to happen. And it's a little bit paradoxical. It's a little bit confusing, or it's a little bit it makes sense, but it also doesn't make sense.
What about there's a lot of talk about the peculiar or particular way that people behave on a bulletin board when they talk to each other in this sort of blindfolded fashion. Yeah. What have been your observations, both of you, about the social, psychological aspects of communicating via modem?
It is different, certainly, than communicating via telephone.
For example, it tends to put people into niche groups. Niche means like very specific. So you might have a Lego magazine before, but now you have like very specific Lego minifigurine collection places. At the same time, it also, at this point of the internet, has created a kind of a monoculture. So before, you might have had locally regional kind of memes or sayings or things that people said, and now all of Gen Alpha knows Skibbity, whatever it is. And all of Gen Alpha knows the same kinds of memes and says the same kinds of things and watches some of the same movies. And so I've heard it argued both ways, that we're more of a monoculture now, say 30 years since the internet was created and really used. But then we're also more balkanized. Balkanized is a word that basically means separated out into different territories. So socially, maybe the internet means people are both more isolated and more connected at the same time. And I don't know why, but I think that does make sense. We can discuss this. Finally, one of the layers of abstraction is in the actual medium. So there's an HTTP protocol, and then we also have HTML, which we will make a single HTML page in this class as sort of a final project. So what does HTTP stand for? You might have seen this at the top of your internet browser and what they call a URL. What it is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. What is hypertext? It is text that is super, it's like alive. It can connect you from one thing to another thing. So if you have a link in an HTML file, then you have hypertext. It's basically like a living word that can link from one thing to another thing. How exciting. Okay. I will undo that. So what hypertext allows you to do is it allows you to surf the internet. Now, the whole idea of surfing basically comes from channel surfing, where if you had cable or if you've been in like a hotel with cable, you can just keep hitting the button to change the channel. And they used to call that surfing channels on a TV. And it basically refers to how you can jump from one link to another link to another link to another link to another link. And that click, 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 click thing, it's kind of like what scrolling used to be, except it was a little bit more directed. So I'll go over the homework that I want you to do here in just a second. We're going to go over websites and protocols next week. We'll talk about web search. We'll talk about the exact kinds of messages that go back and forth between your computer system, and it will be very informative, I think. All right. So for our discussion, please be sure to watch that video. I'll also link it here. The Kid's Guide to the Internet, very nostalgic for me, probably just funny to you. We're also going to go over some Morse code practicing. So I'll bring in some papers and we'll do a kind of class activity. So maybe bring a pencil. And then for your homework here, I want you to use Wikipedia surfing to find a random article and then try to only surf to get to the internet. What would that look like? I'm going to show you a quick example here. So yeah, we'll see you soon. Okay, so if you go to wikipedia.org, you should be able to click on English. Then you click on this little, whatever that is. I think they call it a hamburger menu. I should know this. Then you click on Random Article. Now, this is about Hillbilly Shoes, which is an album I've never heard about from 1999. Wikipedia, as you may or may not know, is edited by a lot of different people, and it's kind of like a community encyclopedia, which tries to represent everything that exists and explain it kind of like a dictionary for stuff. Could I get to the internet through this? I don't know. But where are the hyperlinks here? Well, in this case, all of the hyperlinks are blue. This is a hyperlink. This is a hyperlink. This is a hyperlink. This is a hyperlink. If you're on an actual computer, when you move your mouse over a hyperlink, what shows up here is a little finger gesture, like, hey, I want to point and click on this thing. And so if I click from this article on Hillbilly Shoes, I can be transported into country music. Kablam. There I am. Now I'm in country music. I'll turn off my sketches here. So at this point for your homework assignment, just take a piece of paper and write down where you started and every link along the way, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss it next time that we're in class. Basically in about a week. I'll go over this a little bit in our discussion, but what's surprising is that you can get pretty close to finding something like the internet by just clicking around on some of these things. So for example, I'm going to try to find it now and we'll see if I can. So like there's music genres. Maybe the internet is mentioned here. We've got pop music, albums. So every time I click on something, sometimes you get a little bit more general. That's just part of the way the networks work. I see hip hop music. Maybe I'd find something about the internet on hip hop music. Still scrolling down here. There's dancing. Maybe I'll find something on TikTok when I click on dance. Because TikTok is on the internet. Modern dance, dragon dance. I don't know what this stuff is. Opera is probably not going to get me closer to the internet. Electronic dance music. That gets me closer to the internet because it's electronic. Now, where are we here? Electronic instruments, club culture. What I'm looking for is like modern stuff. MIDI. MIDI's electronic. Synthesizer, sampled sounds. So I might not get there super easily. This might take you a couple of tries, but that's what we're here to do. BBC. Now, broadcasting, broadcaster, public service broadcaster. World service. Are we going to get to the internet? Are we going to get to the internet? I don't know. Maybe I'll pick a different thing to do besides the internet, but this is what we're going to do here. So We've looked at the internet. We've looked a little bit about the precursors and some context to the internet. And we will see you soon.